distinguished speakers, panelists, and dear audience. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for joining us today on this webinar organized by Kashmir Institute of International Relations in collaboration with World Muslim Congress on 46th session of United Nations Human Rights Council. This webinar is a parallel event during 46th session of United Nations Human Rights Council with the title Absence of Fair Trial of Political Prisoners with special reference to Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Today, I have my co-host, Mr. Altaf Hussain Wani. He's Chairman, Kashmir Institute of International Relations. Before introducing the subject for today's webinar, I would like to introduce my distinguished panelists because some are new and of course they are renowned in their respective fields. But here it's my responsibility to introduce you all. I have with me the chief guest of today's webinar, Dr. Iqtidar Cheema. I will introduce him later about his bio, but at the moment he's the chair of the chief guest of this webinar. He's member United Nations Global Steering Committee. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. I have with me Ms. Julie Ward. Ms. Julie Ward, a very good friend of Kashmiri Nation and a strong advocate of human rights all around the globe. She is former member European Parliament, a British politician, and she served as member European Parliament between 2014 to 2020. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us again. I welcome you. I have with me Mr. Afzal Khan. He is former member European Parliament, UK Labour, MP Shadow Deputy Leader, and he is leader of the House of Commons. He'll join us in a few moments. He's trying to get connected. We have with us Ambassador Malik Nadeem Abid Saab. He's from US and he's again a very strong voice for the oppressed and suppressed people of particular Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And he's also a true friend of the people of occupied Kashmir. We have with the Duke Salman Khan Saab from South Africa. Thank you very much, Salman Saab, for joining us. I have with me Professor Arjun A. Sethi. He's adjunct professor at Georgetown University, US. Thank you, Arjun, for joining me. We have Professor Khalid Bedon. He's professor of law and writer. And we are really honored to have you all on this webinar today. We have with us Professor Dr. Dilnawaz Ahmed Gardezi. He's the Vice Chancellor in University of Kotli Azad Jammu and Kashmir. He'll be joining us soon. We have with us Saeed Faz Naqshbandi Saab, convener APHC All Parties Video Conference. Thank you very much, Naqshbandi Saab, for joining. And we have another victim. We have another victim from Indian occupied Kashmir, Umar Burt. He's Kashmiri activist and a victim. And myself, I'm Shugufta Ashraf. I'm coordinator for this webinar, and my co-host is Mr. Altaf Hussain Wani. Distinguished panelists, as far as the title of this this conference is concerned, I would like to share something with you because we have to really talk on these particular lines, and of course, other than these as well. In 2011, Amnesty International described a Public Safety Act as a lawless law, which had in effect supplanted the criminal justice system in Jammu and Kashmir. 8 years later, this description holds just as true. This briefing indicates a pattern of abuse by Jammu and Kashmir authorities who have continued to use the Public Safety Act in a manner that furthers human rights violations, including by detaining children, passing Public Safety Act orders without due diligence and on vague and general grounds, ignoring the limited safeguards under the Act, subjecting individuals to revolving door detention, and using Public Safety Act to prevent release on bail and undermine the criminal justice system in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The text of the Public Safety Act continues to violate several of India's obligation under international human rights law, including respecting detainees' fair trial rights, to be promptly informed of the reason of their arrest, to judicial review of the detention, to be represented by counsel of their choice, and to remedy for the abuses. Further regressive amendments to the Act in 2018, we also led to detainees being held in prisons far from their homes in violation of human rights standards. Detainees are often not provided all relevant material regarding their detention, and the shroud of secrecy surrounds the functioning of advisory board. Unlawful detention and the torture and other ill treatments also continue to be enabled by the Public Safety Act. The Public Safety Act, which was ostensibly introduced as an exceptional measure to detain people who pose an extreme and imminent danger to security, continues to be used as an alternative to the criminal justice system. Authorities use the Public Safety Act to detain people suspected of criminal offenses against whom they do not have sufficient admissible evidences, or to detain people who should not have arrested at all. In doing so, they violate not just the right of the detainees to a fair trial, but also the right of victims to crime to the justice. While in Jammu and Kashmir High Court routinely quashes detention orders which fail to comply with procedural safeguards, it does little to tackle the impunity enjoyed by the executive authorities. This system has contributed to the already widespread fear and alienation felt by people living in Kashmir Valley. Accountability, uh, accountability and transparency and respect for human rights are required for all the human being on earth. But unfortunately, these all rights are badly abused by occupation forces in Indian occupied Kashmir. This is overall the broad spectrum of this webinar, which we are going to discuss. So one by one, of course, Mr. Co-host will give you the floor for looking deep into all these things and what actually you people who are subject in or are experts in their respective fields, how do they see such type of abuses and violations of human rights, particularly the prisoners of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So this is all the concept note of this webinar. With this, I will hand over my this webinar to Mr. Altaf Hussain Wani for further procedures. Mr. Altaf Hussain Wani, you have the floor for next proceeding.
Thank you, Professor Shugupta, for introducing the panel and the subject of today's webinar. As we have been discussing the right to fair trial, as we know, the right to fair trial has become the fundamental pillar of the international law to protect individuals against arbitrary treatment since the inception of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When individuals face a criminal trial, they are confronted by the machinery of the state. They come into contact with the police, the court system, the prison system, judiciary. How they are treated when accused of a crime is a test of the state's commitment to respect for the human rights. The test is even more severe when the accused is a political prisoner. When the authorities suspect the person of being threat to those in power. As you are all the experts on law and you know the different articles in the international civil and political rights, like Article 15 and 14 and 15 deal with the fair trial, and Article 6 and 7 of the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights, that deals with it, and like many other instruments in African human rights and also the Arab Rights Declaration has a reference to this fair trial. When we come to the in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, we have seen over the years, especially from last 33 years, how the political prisoners, especially the political prisoners, how they are treated, how the trial is conducted, and what procedures have been adopted by the Indian state. And all these procedures, actually, they are being tried either under sedition laws or they are being tried under the terrorist laws. Well, recently, the special rapporteur on the rights of the people by countering the terrorism report also referred to this how states are misusing the anti-terrorism laws. So in Indian occupied Kashmir, we see scores of our political leaders are languishing behind bars on these on the pretext of these counter-terrorism laws. And likewise, as Professor Shukta was mentioning about this Public Safety Act, how this law has been used by the Indian state to keep the public leaders, the political leaders, out of circulation in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir from the public again and again. Even the UN High Commissioner during her first report in 2018 also referred to it, that the Indian government is abusing the Public Safety Act, and then also they amended the Public Safety Act and made it possible that all those who are arrested or detained or they are taken to the different jails in the different Indian states, and thereby causing more serious consequences to their families and their children. So there, at this time, we have some serious problems with these political prisoners of the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, like Yasir Malik, Shabir Ahmad Shah, Masrat Alam Bhatt, Naeem Ahmad Khan, Asia Indrawi, Famida, and like many others, or languishing Ayaz Akbar. I can name Altaf Ahmad Shah. There are scores of others who are languishing in different Indian prisons on these roads. And like all these, there are hundreds others who are behind the bars on the Public Safety Act. Even the trials which are conducted in NIA courts. Now, India has used also, firstly, it was the Public Safety Act. Now, the NIA has its own rules and procedures by which they prosecute the people. But now the people are behind the bars since a long time, but there is no trial as yet conducted against them. There is no no trial, not to think of a fair trial. There is no trial as yet. They are put behind the bar. They are arbitrarily behind the bar. So to discuss this with, I think I will first invite to listen from Dr. Iqtidar Cheema on this subject. Dr. Cheema, you will acknowledge us about this whole situation, how you see it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vani. I'm very grateful for your invitation once again. My name is Dr. Iqtidar Cheema. I'm on the United Nations Global Steering Committee for Prevention of Genocide and Atrocity Crimes for the last 6 years, as well as I've previously been associated with the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom as their consultant, and I did a special report for United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is constitutional and legal challenges faced by the minorities in India. I will send a link to the participants, so if they so wish, they can look at the report, which was published under the Trump administration. So you have elaborated, Mr. Vani, very well about the prisoners and their situation. What I would like to do today, because obviously I'm being on the UN Global Steering Committee, I would like the participants today to know that what are the norms, what are the convents on political prisoners when it comes to United Nations and its declarations. So when we talk about the political prisoners, Article 9 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights clearly says, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. That is Article 9 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. By the way, India is a signatory to that. Furthermore, on Article 10 of the same Declaration on Human Rights, it is very clear that everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his/her rights and obligations and any criminal charge against him. So both these articles clearly mention that, first of all, not only the political prisoner, anybody who has to be arrested, they shouldn't be subject to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. And if they are arrested, they are entitled for a fair public hearing and independent and impartial tribunal. Now, when we apply both of Section 9 and Section 10 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, it means that every citizen should be assumed as innocent until offense is established against them, and they must be given full opportunity of being heard. The second thing, obviously, which we derive from these two very important articles is that no one should be held guilty of any penal offense on account of any act or omission which did not constitute a penal offense under national or international law at the time when it is committed. So why I'm stressing this, that they should not be taken in for a penal offense, because India has criminalized the peaceful protest. India has criminalized the right and freedom of expression. India has criminalized even people who are posting on social media. And obviously, India has shut down all the access to internet, which is worst example in the modern days, so-called procedural democracy. Now, when we look at these two acts, we can clearly see that India has extensively been using terrorist and disruptive activities act, TADA, and Public Safety Acts. These are two very draconian laws which India has consistently used in Jammu and Kashmir. And when it comes to TADA, TADA has been used in various other states of India. I remember through my research that the TADA was extensively used after Sikh genocide as well, from 1986 to 1996. After Sikh genocide of 1984, TADA was extensively used to persecute people and mass shooting, mass killing, and those who were arrested in that dark period, only 1% of those Sikhs were later persecuted, which clearly shows that how these draconian laws have been applied not only on Kashmiris, but some other communities in India. Now, why these Public Safety Act and this TADA is so controversial? Under this, the security forces has wide powers to arrest or detain anyone for up to 1 year without presenting the accused before the court of law, and can detain without any charge sheet. So you can go to anyone's house, you can raid a house, get a man, woman, child, anybody. You don't have to give them a reason why you are arresting them. You simply detain them, and you don't have to present them to a court of justice. Now, is that what we call democracy, where there is rule of law? Definitely not. It is look like something from medieval ages, where people are held to or detained without any reason. And what sort of people are being arrested under this Public Safety Act? I would like to, for the panelists to note, any common people. They don't have to be involved in any militancy. They don't have to have any arms or ammunition. Anyone could be detained, but just accusing them that they are endangering the public safety. Whether they are protesting peacefully, whether they are giving any pamphlets, whether they are talking about detention of others, they can be taken into the custody of police under this Public Safety Act. Now, one of the examples, because there are so many case studies for us to look at, but one of the very example is Musarrat Alam Bhatt, whom most of you would know. He's a very, very progressive, well-learned man, and obviously he's alumnus of very prestigious missionary Tyndall Biscoe School. Now, he has been arrested so many times. Over the last 25 years, he has been held under a Public Safety Act so many times, and without giving any reasons. Now, he is one of the classic example of the Kashmiri leadership, that he has never been given any fair trial. He has never been given any reason why he's being arrested. And he is not the only one. There are so many other examples where people simply, by voicing against the Indian atrocities, by simply writing anything in the newsletters, by just distributing any pamphlets, have been held. Someone who was in the jail, who was someone a threat to the public safety. Now, when you look at this PSA, it violates Article 9 and 14 of International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. And likewise, not only in the international context, it violates the UN conventions, it also violates the Indian Constitution, like Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, which clearly states the state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or the equal protection of the law within the territory of India. Now, when you are violating your own constitution, and and I think it is very clear to the people who are keeping a close eye on India that since the BJP government has assumed power in India, it has become an ultra-nationalist state, which is destroying the spirit of democracy, as well as it's violating its own constitution. Now, when it comes to the fair trial, obviously, in 1 year, when people have no legal representation, no access to justice, they are not even being presented to the court. So there is no fair trial. They don't even have a right to trial. Forget about fair trial. They are not even being tried and being detained, tortured, and being murdered in the security forces custody. Now, obviously, looking at this, there is another problem we have is once court release somebody, finally, if you were lucky enough that after all that torturous period, you are still alive and court give an order for release, the prisoners are not released sometime. And if they are released, immediately another first information report, which is called FIR, launched against them in Indian held Kashmir, where they are rearrested again. And Musarrat Alam Bhatt is an example. For the last 25 years, every time he will get a bail or he would be in a position to get out of the jail, new FIR would be launched and he would be rearrested. And not only him, we have people like Muhammad Yasin Malik, Shabir Ahmad Shah, Muhammad Ashraf Sehrai, Asia Indarabi, Naeem Khan, Iltaf Shah, Nahida Nasreen, Fahmida Sufi, Nasima Bano. And this list goes on and on and on. It's a long list, but I have just mentioned few of the names since we have a very short time. So this is nothing new. And obviously, other communities are quite familiar with this pattern. There are so many Sikh political prisoners who are still being detained, although they have completed their period of sentence, but they are not being released. And one of them is Jagtar Singh Hawara, who has completed his sentence but not being released by the Indian authorities. We must all note, as you are aware, that United States Commission on International Religious Freedom last year put India in list of CPC, country of particular concern, which means more or less to be blacklisted for religious freedom, as well as United Nations Human Rights Council, and obviously the Chief of Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights have issued various statements of what's happening in Kashmir. And previously, Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, for whom I previously testified in Washington about its special hearing on Kashmir, everyone has voiced, but it seems that the government of India is completely ignoring all these international voices. We should all strengthen these voices and keep on voicing these, because these atrocity crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide should not get unnoticed. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Cheema, for your presentation. Very eloquently, you described the situation in occupied Kashmir in perspective of international law and international humanitarian law. Not only PSA or SADA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which is now largely being used against the Kashmiri journalists since August 5th, 2019. This is another one. And we have seen that some of the Kashmiris who remained in jail for 23 years for one or the other accusation on the part of the government of India, and then they were found non-guilty after 23 years in the jail with no reparation. This is another situation which we are facing in occupied Kashmir. I will give floor to Ms. Julie Ward, former MEP, a good friend of ours. Ms. Julie, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I wish we could be together in Geneva, where we had many opportunities to raise these issues and to demonstrate our solidarity with the struggle of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So this is a very technical issue that we're dealing with today, and I don't pretend to be an expert in law. However, the situation that we're talking about is not new. We go back decades, in fact. looking at this particular violation, the violation of detention without access to fair trial, I discovered that the United States Subcommittee on Human Rights in 2004 had a conference about this. You can actually find the details of this if you Google online. And it was called Exploring Human Rights Abuses in Kashmir and Disputed Territories. So how many different administrations in the USA came and went in that period and nothing changed? Professor Shagufta, at the beginning, an introduction of this important conference, talked about the Amnesty International report, which was 2011, and in fact was Amnesty International United States chapter, which did that report. It's 86 pages long, you know, and still nothing changes. In fact, the situation gets worse. And the 2018 report of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights report specifically talks about this issue, and in its recommendations at the end says that fair trial must be undertaken by the government. So this is a long-running issue. However, under COVID, it becomes 10 times worse because the judicial system was already creaking at the seams, was very slow, was very bureaucratic, was not really progressing these cases fast enough. And so COVID became a very convenient cover for the Modi government. I won't say Indian government because I think the problem is the current administration. So the current administration, which has made things particularly difficult and has been incredibly hostile to all minorities. So this is not, when we're looking at human rights abuses in India, we need to remember that Indian minorities in India also subject to terrible human rights abuses. But under the Modi government, COVID has created a very convenient cover and excuse, not simply to do nothing, but to actually exacerbate the situation and to make it worse. And at the end of the day, it's people and families just going about their business who have become victims at the center of the most terrible injustices and human rights abuses. Some people are imprisoned for a very long time. They don't know necessarily what they are going to be charged with. They are deprived of their international rights as political prisoners. They are denied access to health. They are denied visits. And this means that beloved family members do not have access, do not see their sons or their daughters, their husbands, their fathers for a very long time, and sometimes don't see them ever again until they visit maybe the graveside. And I think that we have to take account of the wider human cost of lack of fair trial and the way that the laws have been changed and abused. You know, the legal system has been, and the constitution has been changed and abused in order for a racist policy by the Modi government to make the people of Jammu and Kashmir suffer even more than they were already suffering. I don't want to say much more than that, but I just wanted us to give a wider human context for the situation, because the suffering is the suffering for everybody. It is not just the suffering of the person in the jail under the terrible conditions, deprived of human rights. The suffering is much, much broader. And we have to somehow try and support these families in their anxiety and their loneliness. Maybe they also lost the breadwinner too from the family. We have to try and find ways to give succor and support these families while they continue to live in this awful limbo where nothing ever seems to progress. And I just want to thank you so much for your continued incredible attention to detail and the way you are able to bring together this broad representation of people from different backgrounds to speak about the events. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reward. You're right, the sufferings, the collective punishment which people of Kashmir are facing by virtue of being there and there, being kept in detention in faraway places in India and not being provided the opportunity to meet them and to have access to the outside world. Now I will bring in Dr. Khalid Bjorn, who is the Professor of Law at the Harvard School of Law and author of critically acclaimed book, American Islamophobia. Dr. Khalid, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the invitation. Really moved by the words of my co-panelists before me. I don't want to be redundant, and I just want to address some sort of like new and novel points that hopefully enrich the conversation. So, I'll first lead off as a law scholar. I'm somebody who studies due process, studies the First Amendment here in the United States, and some technical observations that were observed by my preceding speakers. We clearly see an infringement, not only an infringement, but a complete erosion and decimation of justice with regard to fair trials taking place in Kashmir and Jammu as a consequence of what the Indian regime has unleashed. No due process, the use of secret evidence, the leverage of the war on terror and the terrorism framing to essentially arrest individuals without any modicum of evidence. And these individuals who are being arrested and detained, are kind of like run the gamut of the most vulnerable segments of society. There's arrest of minors, elders, politicians, activists, journalists on the ground, again, being imprisoned for indefinite periods, and being detained, as Mrs. Ward just mentioned, under the most sort of precarious conditions, given that we have COVID and the perils associated with COVID being intensified within the confines of, carceral spaces. So that's the technical sort of analysis that I have, is that there's no sort of esteem, no sort of respect for the very cornerstones of democracy in Jammu and Kashmir by a nation that sort of, anoints itself as being the largest democracy in the world, clearly contradicting itself in its activity in Jammu and Kashmir. But beyond this technical analysis of denying these basic human and civil rights to the residents of Jammu and Kashmir, there's something far broader going on and something far more nefarious going on, in that these detentions serve a broader purpose. And the purpose here with India obviously is imperial and it's authoritarian, that it's using these arrests and using these detentions to crush morale, to suppress free speech, to prevent and abort dissent, to prevent activism on the ground by individuals on the outside. So it's critical for us to view these arrests and these detentions as sort of a broader authoritarian tool being used by the Indian regime to absolutely crush any efforts or any modicum of self-determination and resistance on the part of the people of Kashmir. And that is a tactic that authoritarian regimes have used for a long time. We clearly see that taking place in China, for instance, where en masse detentions are, in part a tool to arrest, but also detain individuals that the state fears, but also again to suppress the spirit and the will of the people to resist tyranny and to resist authoritarian government. And that's what purpose these detentions serve in the broader sort of lens. Beyond the scope of detention, one thing I can address, and hopefully Professor Sethi can address this as well, being in the United States, is one thing that really distresses me and really disappoints me is the lack of coverage Kashmir as a broader struggle receives here in the United States. And there is little consciousness, there is little cognizance, people in the United States, and I'm talking within human rights and social justice and racial justice circles, have of what's going on in Kashmir and Jammu. This is an issue that has been severely neglected. It's an issue that receives little media attention in the mainstream here in the United States. Also receives little attention amongst law scholars, but also law activists in the United States. And one thing that I've been pushing for as an activist, but also as a public commentator, is to you make the issue in Kashmir and Jammu more focal as not only a human rights issue, but also an issue of contemporary imperialism and the threats of Hindutva populism beyond the boundaries of India. So getting this issue on the radar and getting it to register with activists, lawyers, advocates on the ground has been something that has been a commitment of mine for the last several years. And beyond just getting it to be on the register and the radar of individuals on the ground, activists and advocates in the United States, it's critical to view Kashmir as, part and parcel of this broader objective of the Modi regime to spread Hindutva supremacy, Hindutva bigotry beyond the bounds of India. And I'm somebody who studies Islamophobia, and you can see the Islamophobic dimensions of what the Modi regime is doing in Kashmir and in Jammu. So this is part of a far broader project. What the political prisoners are experiencing and enduring is only one sliver and one dimension of what the Modi regime is using as an instrument to not only occupy, but to really suppress and really strip the people of Jammu and Kashmir of their will to resist, of their spirit to fight against, a growing regional and global superpower. And it's really critical for individuals here in the United States, like myself, to speak up and to raise consciousness amongst individuals with, authority and with some influence in the United States. So I'll stop there, and I'm excited to hear from the other panelists, and I'm excited to field any questions you might have at the close of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalid. You rightly said that it's the biggest project of the Modi's regime to extend the majoritarian rule in the Union-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and it's part of the Islamophobic system which we see around the globe, and especially now in the Modi's regime in India. Now, my next speaker will be Arjun Singh Sethi. Mr. Sethi, you there? Hello, Mr. Sethi, are you there?
I'm here, yeah. Can you see me okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Great. Thank you everyone for being part of this conversation. Thank you to all my co-panelists. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the PSA, some of the intricacies of it, why it's been described as a lawless law, talk a little bit about impact, how it fits within the broader sort of legal architecture within Kashmir, and then leave with two specific closing observations, both around Kashmir in the international context and some of what my colleague and friend, Professor Beydoun, talked about with respect to authoritarianism and Hindutva supremacy in India. The PSA has been widely described as a lawless law. And that's because the statute and those who justify it routinely use language like security of the state, good faith, and public order. It is per se illegal under international human rights law and unconstitutional, I would argue, under Indian law. And that's because it allows for preventive detention, right? And so when we think about the law, You don't have to be a lawyer to understand this. The general idea is that you can only be stopped, let alone arrested, if there is evidence of a crime. In this case, as we know from the prior panelists who've shared, with respect to the PSA, that evidence isn't required. People can be held for 2 years without trial or charge. And in some cases, it's actually used as a revolving door. And so folks will be released under the PSA because the time may have expired or because the government feels the charges may not be as strong as they could be. And then they will arrest them under another PSA. And so there have been times where people have been held and rearrested sort of on a staggered basis using this discriminatory law. It's also often used as a form of collective punishment. And so what do I mean by that? There have been numerous instances throughout the year where the alleged suspect can't be found. And as a mechanism for bringing them out and arresting them, the government actually arrests their friends and family. Furthermore, if the government determines that specifying the very reason for the arrest would somehow contravene the public interest, they don't even have to state that. And so this is why, again, this has been routinely called a lawless law, and international bodies who've looked at it, including the United Nations and international bodies, have found that it violates basic fundamental human rights norms. And so let's talk a little bit about the impact. And again, here, I just want to reiterate some of the remarks of my panelists. This law has been used to arrest journalists. It's been used to arrest political leaders, activists, religious leaders, and perhaps more importantly, it's also been used to arrest everyone and anyone. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the law, again, by its very nature, is so ambiguous that the Indian government has at times just used it and used its provisions to just engage in mass arrests, and in some cases to just pick up people randomly off the street. And so this has, apart from the actual concrete impact, and we heard about this today, right? People languish in jails, people deprived of legal counsel, people not being able to see their family. We heard about how in some cases people arrested are transferred out of state, hundreds and thousands of miles away. But there's also this unbelievably strong chilling impact, right? If you run the risk that you can be arrested at any time, kept behind bars for 2 years, deprived of the ability to know why you're being charged, deprived of the ability to contest the charges, let alone have a trial, it's going to have this chilling impact. And truthfully, credit to the Kashmiri people, credit to activists there that they've continued to resist despite this authoritarian draconian law. The broader context. It's also important to remember that the PSA and the other laws that have been discussed today are also being used within a broader context of authoritarianism. And so we know that India leads the world in internet shutdowns and mobile phone blackouts. We know that India has repeatedly imposed restrictions on the freedom of movement, people's ability to congregate, organize, leave their homes, in some cases gather in groups more than 3 to 4 people. They've limited at times the ability for people to meet publicly, including at houses of worship. And we also know, because again, this has been documented, that Kashmir has been the site of major human rights atrocity. And so I want to mention 2 things in particular. One, torture, and second, enforced disappearances. We know that it's been well documented that people who've been detained under the PSA have been tortured. There were reports confirmed by BBC, Time Magazine, the Washington Post, and others, that Kashmiri activists were subject to some of the same torture methods that were used on detainees at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. This is just as of a few years ago. And again, this has been going on for some time. We also know that there have been enforced disappearances. And here again, I would defer you to the works of and the work of excellent human rights organizations in the region that have documented human rights abuses and forced disappearances and torture that have been going on in Kashmir for a very long time, not just in the last few years. I want to conclude with two observations. And again, both of these have been made, and I kind of just want to tease them out a little more. One, the entire world should be paying attention to Kashmir. In part, as Professor Beydoun says, because it is a site of imperialism, right? It is an imperial project. But apart from that, what we've also seen is that the same legal architecture that is being used in Kashmir is increasingly being used elsewhere to suppress activism, freedom of movement, the ability to organize, the ability to speak, the ability to truth tell. And also the same militarization and same violence is also being replicated. So for example, years ago, Kashmiri writers started to document and write about the use of pellet bullets, bullets that are intentionally designed and created to blind people. And that's what they do, right? And so it was sort of famously written by a Kashmiri author, Mirza Waheed, who talked about how Kashmir was the site of the world's first blinding. Those same pellet guns, those same bullets have since been used on activists and protesters in Europe, in Argentina, and other parts of the world. And so we have a responsibility to address Kashmir for its own sake, because atrocities are underway, but also because, again, this architecture is also being used, and these militarization techniques are also being used elsewhere. And then one final observation, and that is specifically regarding India. For too long, India has gotten a pass as the world's largest democracy. The thing is, democracies only work if people can speak freely, if they can associate freely, if they can truth tell, if there is a diversity of political parties, if journalists can freely publish. And what we are seeing in India today is what I would argue the coalescence of an extraordinarily dangerous set of forces. You have a culture of impunity that goes back to what's happened in Kashmir, the genocide against Sikhs in the 80s, and forced disappearances in places like Punjab, Nagaland, Kashmir. Of course, lack of accountability in Gujarat. This culture of lawlessness, right? That's connected to this culture of impunity. You have these imperial ambitions, right? Again, Kashmir is a prime example. And then you have rising authoritarianism. And by that, I mean, again, internet blackouts. The idea that in India today, Munawar Faruqi, a young Muslim comedian, can be arrested for cracking a joke that he never even told. The idea that India has now imposed, or is set to impose, a 36-hour firewall, right? That will apply to every social media company, such that India can order any social media post to be taken down. And if it's not, the employees of those companies can be arrested and put in jail, right? The idea that any journalist today can face sedition charges for reporting on the farmers' protest, right? We've seen journalists, the executive editors from The Caravan, The Wire, and others be charged with sedition. Their offices be raided for just reporting and documenting what's happening on the ground. And then finally, we've also seen Hindutva supremacy, right? This idea that Hindus should enjoy privileged status in India, and all other faiths and all other communities should enjoy tertiary or non-relevant status. And really, Hindutva supremacy, in some ways, isn't very dissimilar to white supremacy here in the United States. They're both supremacist frameworks that are being used to target, disenfranchise, and in some cases even murder communities who are different from them. And so I just want to, again, end by emphasizing that we need to pay special attention to Kashmir on its own sake, but also because that framework and those technologies and those militarization acts of violence that we've seen are being replicated elsewhere. And we need to pay special attention to India, because of the coalescence of all of these dark forces that are also in so many ways spreading to other parts of the world.
Thank you, Arjun, for your very extensive talk on the subject. And really today, I saw a report by a Swedish institute, which says that India is no longer a autocracy, but an electoral autocracy. So we have seen, and you are very rightly pointed out, as Khalid Mahmood also said, that we have to focus on Kashmir because there are things which have not been spoken by the world, are not been taken by the world regarding Kashmir that are being now threats around the globe. And this is a very dangerous that the rise of Hindutva, the sovereignization is now taking a global phenomenon. So we, the people around the globe, have to think of Kashmir and thereby stop the Indian hegemony. Now my other panelist will be Duke Salman from South Africa, I believe. So Duke Salman, you have the floor. Do you hear me?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes.
You are loud.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for the invitation. A special thanks to the master of ceremony, Mr. Wani and Professor Shagufta. Thank you very much for keeping this important discourse alive. And I would like to send a greeting of a peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all the panelists and all the people, those are listening, this very important discourse on internet as well as on a social media. All the glorification to the Lord, the beautiful Lord, the creator, the protector and provider, whatever between the heaven and the earth, and all the Drood, the Nabi, Drood go to the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and also, our facilitation to all the panelists, those who make it special, and my brother here, Arjun Sarsaria Kal. I think it's a very timely discourse, very important discourse, and I will come from premises. I'm an activist by nature, and I don't hold any public office or international office that I'll be shy and I will not be wearing a velvet glove. I like to say as it is, and we're dealing with a very fascist state, the lawlessness of the law, and no wonder the lawlessness of the law, when it was declared by the Amnesty International, the door were closed. When there is the point of a lawlessness of the law in Jammu and Kashmir, they were kicked out from the India. So that's type of a vicious state, a fascist state, a right-wing BJP government is no longer what used to be the India as a India, the very much of a center of a secular and a I would say plural values. It's no longer there. So let me come on to the main issue, the fair trial, the access to the fair trial. Now we have to look at the on a three layers. One, on an international law. International laws are there, but it's a good feeling law. Now, if you look at the UDHR with a 30 article, more than 31 article, and ICCPR have 53 articles. And all articles are so beautifully crafted that if you read them, you think we are saved, our civilization is saved, and we should not be having any injustices, any discrimination around the world. But on the same laws that provide a loophole within the Article 18.3, that the law and order of the locality can precede all these laws, and these laws become not applicable. So that is a dichotomy of the law, and that's very, very sad, because if you look at the set of the laws that we drive, most of the international constitute drive the aspiration from the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights from the 30 articles and ICCPR 53 articles, they become completely redundant. Now, let's go back. Let's look at the international ratification. India was a part of the adoption in 1951, but they officially ratified in 1979. The ICCPR, they ratified in 1979 too. International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of the Racial Discrimination, 1968. The Convention on the Rights of the Child was 1992. So I can read out to you every single law. Then India would have its own constitution, which was adopted in 1950, then remanded in 1953, and then of course, goes on and on and on. Of course, then India, the Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir was given a special status in 1954 under the Article 370 and 370-35A. a lot of people, they don't ask the question and they stop at the 35A. What is a B? Because there is a B all the way to Z, because there are more than 25 different small independent state has been given autonomous state, whether it's a Junagadh, Munwara and all of them going through the same problem what the Kashmir is going through. Kashmir is the biggest, and Kashmir is the most important piece in the geopolitical contest because it's connect India in a landmass to the Central Asian Republic. Now, let me coming back. Let's say what is the articles now under the Article 10 of the Universal of the Declaration of the Human Rights, where it promises that all the country must respect the fair trial. And the ICCPR Article 14 talk about the fairness and the fair trial. It is an absence, completely absence, because we're not dealing with a functional democracy. It is sad that we're dealing with a very dysfunctional democracy. And as far as I can go and say, as I am not holding any public offices and I'm not any form of a diplomat, I would say it's in a banana republic. Because if you look at the component of the Article 14 ICCPR, the Article 14A talk about the right to a competent, independent, and impartial tribunal. Do we have that? No, we don't. We're talking about the competent, independent, impartial. Right to the public trial, 14.1 RCPP. No, it is not available. Right to be presumed innocent. That's Article 14.2. Right to be silenced, Article 14.3G. Right to be silenced. People get tortured until they die. Right to appeal. Article 14.5, the right for the defense from the counsel. Article 14.3, the right to the equality in the court. This is the Article 14. So how many articles that we can talk about it, and we can talk about the General Comment of the 35 of the United Nations, and we can talk about the General Comment of the 32. So these laws are as good as, it's just a lip service, because these are a soft laws which has not been implemented in India, especially when it's come to the Jammu and Kashmir. Now, what is more sad? What is more sad? When we talk about the law, those are the custodian of the law and looking after the law. When there was a sedition charges was given, the Kashmiri students was arrested in Karnataka. The Hubli Bar Association, the custodian of the law, they release the resolution and they say none of the bar member or nor the external member will be allowed to represent these Kashmiri boys. So if the custodians are the law in itself, then God can help that country. And what is said? That we all international parties, the professor, the experts, and the diplomats, we are all party of that genocide, and the murder is taking place because we come to big seminars and we go to the big webinars, and that's where it ends. The hot year ends at the webinar. There is no action has been taken because we keep providing India a license to kill. And this is very, very sad because that should not be happening in the 21st century. And that is very, very sad. And that's very sad indeed. Why? Because I'll tell you another example. When the Mashal encounter happened, the fake encounter happened, and the three boys in a Sonapindi was shot dead. A brave journalist, an investigative journalist in August 2017, written a beautiful article and dissecting the Indian law, international law, and trashing them. What happened to him? Just 1 year after, he was shot dead. So this is the Republic of India, is that what we are dealing with it. Now, what is the problem? Then why the international community is so quiet on it? I'll tell you why. Because from the 1947, when India as a new colonialist take it over the Jammu and Kashmir and the unions of the India and all the 570 small independent states, they were a liberal, they were like a realism, they were adopted a policy of a liberalism. It means their realism rather than they have the might, they got the state, they got the power. But from the 70s and 80s onward, the digital technology, the mass production, and India became the biggest market and the biggest manufacturing hub. And then, of course, they start exporting the technical expertise around the world. They become a new liberal political dispensation where the people look at the market at the cost of a human rights. So if you go to the United States of America, if you go to South Africa, they say, yes, we got 200 million was given to us for fighting the poverty. There was 179 million was given to establish an African Union. How do we go and say, India, you are not abiding by international laws? Yes, there is a case open against Moody in South Africa, but on the same time, because of our trade agreements, not one, hundreds of them, our president sent a special private jet to give him a diplomatic immunity and say, you will not be arrested. So this is a completely disregard of international law in place. Now, the question I'm going to ask my brother and sister is, what are we going to do about it? It's no good coming and giving a lecture and I can stand up and I can talk about from morning until evening. I can become a lawmaker and I can dispense all the knowledge and all the beautiful thing, but doesn't change nothing for my brother and sister. Those are dying on a daily basis. When the, what his name is, the young lady which was shot dead by what his name is, Yusufzai Gulal in Afghanistan or in Peshawar, she was given a Nobel Prize. My sister get raped every day because they're going to the school. My sisters get raped on a daily basis in Kashmir. Nobody give them a what's called a Nobel Prize. So this is the dichotomy of a civilized world. And I am asking a question to my panelists, my president, my people in Azad Kashmir, that you can't sit in an air-conditioned office and you think you are my leader and you leading a war, you leading a liberation movement. Dawn of your money, move out from your air-conditioned offices, go out there into the trenches. You must be like Nelson Mandela. You must be like a Che Guevara. You must be like a Fanon. You must be like, one of the people, those were at the forefront of fighting the liberation war. We cannot continue to have a talk shops every now and again because action needs to be taken. The point in time that we are is very topical. Yasin Malik has been put behind the bar. He was a peace ambassador. He was looking for a peace and solidarity. But because if that peace prevails, what will happen? That India have no place to hide. So we need to really, really today, when we leave this presentation, when we leave this webinar, we need to say, can we go back? And what can we say to ourselves? What reflection can we do as a Kashmiri and as a human being, as a sister to sister and brother to brother? What can we do to liberate our people of Kashmir? And that is what the message that I like to leave it with you. I can read you hundreds of the articles. I can tell you the whole of the encyclopedia on the law does not help me. I need to see the action. I need to see the people. I need to see the words follow with the action. Everybody on the panel is here today. I urge you to mobilize international community, wake them up. When we talk about the international boycott, let's make it happen. When we talk about the double lockdown, it wasn't the lockdown that we had in South Africa where the people was not allowed to go and buy things after 9 o'clock. No, my brother and sister, from the 5th of August 2019, the lockdown was such. The mothers could not buy the baby milk formula. The kids has to be buried. The elder cannot get the medication. They have to dig the grave into the houses. That was the lockdown. 13,000 boys abducted. We do not know until today where they are. That is called the lockdown. And we, as a civilized people of the world, we are so disoriented because what we think it is happening at Kashmir, it will never happen to us. At the end, when the liberation of the Kashmir will happen, it will not be the action of enemy will be remembered. It will be the silence of our friend will be remembered. So guys, my friend, my brothers, my sister, my panelists, please, I urge you to follow your presentation with a real word, real action, and do something because time is of the essence. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Duke Salman, for your energetic speech, and you always have an argument in your presentation. And what all the panelists earlier, Dr. Fatima, Khalid, and Arjun Sethi and Julie Ward, everybody was of the same opinion that we have to do something, we have to work on it, we have to create more awareness so that the international community is mobilized and India is forced to stop this genocide in Kashmir. With this, I will bring in Sayyid Faiz Hussain Naqshbandi, he is convener all parties Hurriyat Conference, and attorney from Indian occupied Kashmir. Mr. Faiz Naqshbandi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vani. I have been really moved by the presentations of the panelists. I will try to be very brief because much has been explained on this important topic. It's really very important topic, the fair trial. And here I must tell you that the absence of fair trial results in miscarriage of justice. Throughout the world, number of conventions, instruments, constitutional assurances, declarations have been made to ensure free trial. And what's free here? A free trial which is observed by a trial judge without being partial is a fair trial. And in absence of this, it is the miscarriage of justice, or we can say failure of justice, which occurs when a person is convicted and punished for a crime when they didn't commit it. Then it is a failure of justice. Much has been said by my panelists. I will touch the situation in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Two types of human rights violations are taking place in Kashmir. The human rights violations, and the second one, we are facing constitutional human rights violations. What's constitutional human rights violations? The government of India has enacted a series of black laws that gives unlimited powers to its armed forces in Indian illegally occupied Kashmir to suppress the people. One of them is this, the absence of fair trial. Section 10 of the Public Safety Act was amended. And what was the amendment? Amendment was primarily a detainee, a Kashmiri detainee in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir was to be lodged within the jurisdiction of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir. But it was amended. Now, under the amended section, a Kashmiri detainee can be lodged in any part of the India. What was the motive behind it? The motive is to deprive a Kashmiri detainee of the fair trial. Because when a person, a Kashmiri person, a boy or a youth, is arrested and taken away thousands of kilometers away in India, how he can choose a lawyer of his own choice, which is a basic right. To deprive him of choosing a lawyer of his own choice, this is the absence of fair trial. Second, when the parents would like to know the condition of a Kashmiri detainee in the Indian jails, they can't trace it. Once they will go to any state where they have a knowledge that he is lodged, for example, in the Mumbai, in any jail, the jail authority, once they reach there, the jail authority say, no, he's not here. He is in, how we have heard, he is in another state, thousands of kilometers away again. This section was amended with this intention to deprive the Kashmiri detainees from the fair trial. Burden of proof is reversed for Kashmiri. What's burden of proof? The person, the Kashmiri person who has been arrested, he has to prove that he is not guilty of offense. State has not. The Kashmiri detainee has to prove that he is not guilty of offense. Section 7 of the Public Safety Act. It is very interesting to know that what mentions the Section 7. It says, if the state has a reason to believe that any person may or is likely to do an act, thereby the security of the state is threatened, he can be put in the prison for 2 years. There is no provision of compensation at all. And if a person is detained for 2 years, they call it the preventive detention. And the liberty, you are curtailing a liberty of a person for 2 years and you call it preventive detention. How is this? And these 2 years, for what? If the state has a reason to believe, no, nothing concrete, no proof at all. It is the discretion of the state. And that is why thousands of people, they are languishing in Indian jails under the Public Safety Act. Amnesty International said, as almost all of the panelists said about the Public Safety Act, the Amnesty said, the authorities in Jammu and Kashmir are using Public Safety Act detentions as a revolving door to keep people they can't or won't convict through legal system. Under the prevailing law, under the Constitution, they can't do anything to them. But this Public Safety Act, it is being used against the voice of dissent. These arrests expose people to the high risk of torture and other forms of ill treatment. Again, I will turn your attention towards the Indian law. Confession of a person, confession of a detainee before a police officer has been declared a valid confession under Indian Evidence Act. It has given tremendous rise to the torture in Indian jails. If I will refer you the case of Muhammad Afzal Guru, there was nothing against the Afzal Guru, only a confessional statement which was obtained from him during the custody in the Tihar jail before a police officer, and that was used against him. This is not the fair trial. This is absence of fair trial. And it is a universal guiding laws. In the rest of rare cases, death sentence can be given. But in the Afzal Guru, death sentence was given on circumstantial evidence. This confessional statement, which was made before a police officer in the Tihar jail at Delhi. And that was used against him. If we will see the Section 4 of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, it has given power to the Indian Armed Forces. They can shoot to kill anyone at discretion. Whereas Section 6 of the ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political, expressly says everyone has a right to life. No one can be deprived of this right, even if there is an emergency or war. But in practice, in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian forces have been given this draconian, power, shoot to kill at discretion. And Section 7 of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, it provides impunity. No suit can lie against any Indian soldier in any court of law. Thousands of cases are pending for want of the New Delhi's permission to investigate, to trial the Indian armed forces which are involved in the massacre of the Kashmiris, in the human rights violations. And here, I must tell you that once the state frames, enacts laws that facilitates the human rights violations, it is not the violations, it is the state-sponsored terrorism. That is why it is absolutely correct that the Indian government is involved in Indian state terrorism. With this, I once again thank all the panelists as well as the KIIR and the Altaf Hussain Wani. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Naqshbandi, for your contribution was cooperating on laws like Public Safety Act and Armed Forces Suppression Act, how they are being enacted in Kashmir and what are their repercussions on the society as earlier Arjun Singh Sethi dealt with these very eloquently. Now I will invite Mr. Muhammad Umar. Muhammad Umar is a Kashmiri activist. He has been himself imprisoned, tortured, many times. His family, his brother was martyred, and his family faces all the repercussions of his activism. Umar, you can narrate your story and what you have to say on subject.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Yeah, let me start with, first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Altaf Sahab for giving me opportunity to speak in this webinar. As Altaf Sahab said, I'm from Indian occupied Kashmir, and my brother was martyred in 2015. And he's not the only one in our family who has attained martyrdom. And we have around 10 family members who were killed by Indian occupational forces in the current struggle for freedom. Still, I'm not a victim, as people say you are a victim. Rather, I'm a survivor and a fighter. So coming to the topic, that is the absence of a fair trial of political prisoners. I personally was detained in 2013, that's April, and I was detained for 21 days without having any FIR against me. My brother was also in jail. I was tortured for 21 days. I was sent to army, that is Indian Army Medical Hospital. They gave me simple that treatment, and they tore the slip. That was the, but I have no evidence that I was tortured, I was detained. I have only one evidence, that is my broken arm. This one is totally broken. I cannot work with this arm. That is the denial of this trial. Actually, my brother was also in jail, so I was, but I'm a bit emotional, but I'm not a victim. We are fighters and we fight the occupation, and we feel dignity in fighting. We are proud that our brothers, our family members have attained what we wish to have attained in our time. I'm facing persecution by Indian state. So coming to the topic, that is the denial of or absence of fair trial. There is a history of absence and denial of the fair trial in Kashmir. We have many leaders that's like Qasim Faktu Sahab, Masud Alam Bhatt, Naim Khan Sahab, and Shabir Shah, and Ghulam Qadir Bhatt, Asya Andrabi. Females are also there. They are lodged in Tihar jail. They have all denied the fair trial. Actually, denial of fair trial is to break and suppress the political stance, to break the will of our political leaders. Fair trial of Kashmiri prisoners is very much common, because when there is occupation, we expect these things in Kashmir, where rape is used as a weapon of war, and denial of justice to these rape victims, like in Kunanposhpora, Shupian double murder rape case. This is the what we see in occupations in Palestine and in Kashmir, we see these things. But there are two exceptional cases in Kashmir history, that the absence of fair trial. Two have passed of Maqbul Bhatt and Afzal Guru, but the current situation, there are two exceptional cases of Dr. Qasim Faktu and Masud Alam Bhatt. Dr. Qasim Faktu has completed 27 years in jail. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. But what does the life imprisonment mean? It means 20 years of jail, according to IPC, Indian Penal Code. But Indian Parliament changed this constitution of its own, changed his own constitution to lengthen the imprisonment of Kashmiri leader. His wife Asya Andrabi Sahiba is also in Tihar jail. And we have reports that there is not a sitting chair, even a prayer where she is praying 5 times a day. There is no a praying mat in his cell, in her cell. She is denied the medical checkup, and she, along with 2 of his aides, are lodged in Tihar jail. Dr. Qasim Faktu demand is simple and straight: complete freedom from India and merger with Pakistan. This is what he demands, and he has been denied fair trial. Indian Constitution has changed the IPC, the law, to lengthen his imprisonment. Ghulam Qadir Bhatt, another detainee, has spent 26 years in different Indian jails. And Masud Alam Bhatt has now break the record of Dr. Chait Taiposh, who was lodged for 22 years by Singapore. Dr. Masud Alam Bhatt has been detained for 38 times under Public Safety Act. He is the longest surviving political prisoner without any trial. He has been quashed, his PSA has been quashed, and he was again detained. And it has been now 38 times he was detained under this lawless law. There is APSPA, there are UAPA, the new amended UAPA, which Indian state can declare anyone a terrorist without any trial, without any. They can simply pick a student, a civilian, a shopkeeper. Recently, my friend Irfan Amandar was picked from, which we have a CCTV footage of that. My friend was picked from home at around 11 morning, and next morning he was declared dead in police custody by his law. And his brother was also detained. He was released the next day. But Irfan Amandar, he was my colleague from first standard to university. We have done our masters, but he was declared dead. That's why we have to cross the border. We have come to Pakistan. That's where we are facing persecution back home. That is the situation in Kashmir. But we are not victims, as I'm again looking at the banner that was KIAR has published, that as a victim. I am not a victim. We are fighters. We are fighting the occupation. So we feel dignity in it. And again, the Miss Julie Ward said that current government is it is all about the current government, that is BJP. India was a secular before BJP. It is not secular. India was never a secular state. It's an occupation in Kashmir. We see it as occupation. Whether BJP, whether Congress or any other ruling party is in Delhi, we see it as occupation. And occupations are never resolved. Let me clear it. They should be vanished, and occupations are there to fall. We are fighting the occupation. That is the main thing. And my observations, what we should do for these political prisoners, we have to build a narrative. To build a narrative, and we have to document these things. Unfortunately, in Kashmir, we have not gone through these documentations. We have so many political prisoners, spent 20-25 years in prisons. They have been executed by in different courts of India, but we have not documented these cases. Recently, 3 or 4 people were executed by Indian court they were innocent. After 23 years, court says they are innocent. Where does these 23 years go? This is the situation in Kashmir, and this is the occupation. When there is occupation, there is resistance. And armed resistance is an important component in any decolonization. In any decolonization, the armed resistance is an important factor. We have to do the lawfare, we have to do political, we have to do research, and but armed resistance is an important factor. There is upspa, there is impunity to armed forces, occupational forces to kill. So we have to observe how India is going. We have to counter that. If India is going by lawfare, actually this 370, 35A, this is the lawfare. They have changed the constitution. So we have to counter by lawfare. If they are doing any political, so we have to do politics. But if they have UPSPA there, they have UAPA. So we have to counter these things. We have to, there is a liberation, right of liberation is a fundamental right. So we are fighting the liberation. We are fighting for the cause. Inshallah, we will succeed. Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Umar. I salute your courage. As you said, I am not a victim. I am a survivor and I am a fighter. I keep my fight on. That's the something we need in Kashmir.
As
Ms. Julie Ward has already said that she never said that it was India was a secular. She has verified it. She did not say that India was a secular, but India had that the Constitution of India and the way they were maneuvering things around the globe. India looked like a secular state that was like that. But after the BJP came into power, now we can see a Hindu majoritarian rule and the way they are pushing that rule ahead. So I will now invite Ambassador Malik Nadeem Abid, who is a very strong advocate of the rights of people of Kashmir. Mr. Malik, you have this floor. And after Malik's presentation, we are waiting for Afzal Khan. If he's not here, then we can have a question answer session. Mr. Malik, you have the floor.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you so much, Brother Wani and Professor Shagufta, for your dedication and for your continuous efforts to educate the world about the atrocities in Kashmir. I must say today, Brother Al-Ghafani, you had been very, very unfair to me. Looks like there is a controversy, or there is a what you call a sazish against me, because after the strong and beautiful words from my brother Duke Salman Saab and the young and the brave Kashmiri committed, my brother Umar, I'm speechless. And honestly speaking, I don't even know what I'm going to say after this. And I just want to thank Dr. Iqtidar Cheema Saab for his wonderful, wonderful speech. And I want to add to Honorable Julie Ward's comment about the 2004 hearing of US House of Representatives Subcommittee on Human Rights. The report was titled by the subcommittee as Decade of Terror. This is almost 184 pages long report where they recommended the US government to declare what's going on in Kashmir as genocide. And if it had been declared genocide by the US Congress, the US government was forced to send the force and resolve the issue by force. Unfortunately, we could not have enough votes to get it approved by the floor. But yes, this report is a very, very powerful report, and everyone must read it if they get a chance. So, Wani Saab, there's not much I can say after such a strong presentations from these people, but I must salute Brother Umar for his resistance. And just like you repeated, his words are written on my heart now. We are not victims. We are survivors. We are fighters. Brother Umar, I salute you and every single person in that world's largest prison who is, continuously resisting the occupation and fighting for the freedom. So now that I have to speak anyways, so you invited me and I'm going to speak. So what I'm going to speak. So I'll just share a few lines, a few important points of my favorite document, that is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is probably the only document adopted by the United Nations unanimously on December 10th, 1948. I'll just quickly read a few of those articles. Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 2, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedom set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind. Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 4, no one shall be held in slavery and servitude. Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. Number 7, Article 7, all are equal before law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection by the law. Article 9 and 10 were read by Honorable Dr. Chima. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Article 10, everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal. Article 11, everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Article 13, everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his own. So we are allowed to leave Kashmir, but now I'm not allowed to go back to my ancestors' land. So there are 30 articles. I don't want to go to each and every one of them. I just want to share that looks like this Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written for India, specifically for India, because India is a violator of each and every of these articles. So what I'm going to request, Brother Wani and Professor Shuguf and all the honorable panelists, instead of just attending the seminars and the webinars, I would request to please start writing in the newspapers, in the media, and of course, start writing to the United Nations Secretary General. He's a wonderful, wonderful, powerful leader, but we have to strengthen him. We should also start writing to our government that they should stand up, because almost every country in the world, once or twice, they have been supporting the right to self-determination for people of Kashmir. This is the time we demand the right to self-determination of the people of Kashmir, and all those people, 8 million people living in world's largest prison, like my brother Muhammad Umar. And once again, I salute you, Brother Umar, and everyone like you. We should also write to our own governments and our ambassadors to United Nations that they should support the right to self-determination for people of Kashmir. May Allah bless you all, and may Allah bless you, Brother Wani and the Professor Shagupta. Thank you so much for inviting.
Thank you, Ambassador Malik Mutim Abid Saab, for your contribution. As we are approaching to the end of this webinar, I'll invite all the speakers, if anybody has to add something. Floor is very much open, and if anybody has a question, the floor is very much open. Julie, you can add. Julie Ward, you there?
Yeah, sorry, I am still here. I am really busy trying to do two things at once. So you mind just repeating the question?
Oh, there's no question. I was actually asking if you can have the last word.
Oh, right, okay. Well, first of all, I really appreciate the breadth of knowledge that was brought here today. There are people with direct experience of the violations that we are addressing, and many learned people from academia, from legal perspective, who are giving inputs, and I think that is really important. I suppose in future seminars and workshops, conferences, I would request that you have a greater representation from women. I think this is really important. We know that this affects women and families. I made that point in my presentation, and I'm always very, very grateful for the work that Professor Shagufta does in this respect. But there are, there is a wider group of professionals who are knowledgeable and experienced and capable of speaking out on this subject, who are not from the male line. So perhaps just for better gender representation next time, I think would be helpful to your cause as well. Would be useful. This isn't just something which is proviso for the men. It is of
Actually, we
concern
had
for everybody.
Julie, actually, we had a wonderful representation from the law side in our last event. You saw that we had Barrister Nida and we had, advocate from UK. So just because of not reputation of the same women, I didn't include. So we have very good team on the subject as well.
I know you do. I know. It's difficult to find any criticism, and I will always be somebody who is involved in constructive criticism, which means,
yes,
we are the very best, but we can also be better. And so from the outside, when I share images of the conference speakers with other people, it doesn't seem very balanced. That's all. I know the work
this is
you are
what just
doing
I
behind
said.
the scenes. Yeah,
because this is what I just said, that I mean, rest of the panelists should also know that, because in last panel they were not there.
Yeah.
So just for their information, I want to share that yes, we have wonderful ladies there.
It's not a problem, but especially because we had International Women's Day this week, and you did an amazing event for International Women's Day also,
really
and
good.
everybody should know that. We're fighting this on many fronts, and we will continue to do that. But thank you again for asking me. And
we will be together in CSW as well on 17th.
Yes, of course we will, because we're having a very important event with Margaret, with Margaret Owen's organisation, Widows for Peace and Democracy. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and take care. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much once again.
Arjun, you there? Arjun, you there? Arjun, are you there?
I'm here. Yes.
Yeah, your last words.
Oh, I just wanted to wrap up by thanking everyone for being here, encouraging folks to think about, again, the human impact of Kashmir, understanding that, Kashmiri activists on the ground have done their very best to make this an international issue. And in large measure, it's been a failure of the international community to see and treat it that way. I also want to amplify a message that's come out very strongly today, which is the importance of working with survivors and letting survivors lead the conversation. So much of my work in the United States has been meeting with survivors of hate violence, meeting with survivors of police violence. And I've so often found in my life that lawyers will come together, politicians will come together and try to come up with solutions. But so often the solutions we want and the reforms we need and the advocacy we seek can be learned from survivors and from affected communities. And so thank you to everyone who was here. And most importantly, thank you to the survivors who are participating in this conversation and those who are organizing every day on the ground in India, Kashmir, and taking on authoritarianism.
Thank you, Arjun, for your kind words and very nice suggestions. Faiz Saab, do you have anything to say?
Thank you. My appreciations to all of you. And second, I urge India to comply the international human rights standards. Thank you.
So I think we have come to the conclusion of this workshop and webinar. as we discussed today, the fair trial, the absence of fair trial, its legal perspectives, how it has impacted the people of Indian occupied Kashmir, the victims of the absence of fair trial in Kashmir, how the people are being detained and they are not being produced before the court, and during the torture, many of them have disappeared and many of them were killed during the torture. And likewise, there are hundreds who are still behind the bars on the, because of these lawless laws and using these counter terrorism laws to suppress the people's right to self-determination of people of Jammu and Kashmir. I hope today we have a larger consensus of that we should work together. We should create more and more awareness on the international fora, and we should give more space to the survivors and meet them and listen to their stories and make the world know from the horse's mouth how Indian state is dealing with a common man in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. With this, I thank you, all the participants, especially Professor Shugupta, for coordinating all this workshop, for Julie Ward for taking out your time, Mr. Mohammed Umar, Arjun Sethi, Faiz Naqshbandi, Ambassador Nadeem Saab, and also Khalid and Iqtidar Chima, who have left us. And we were waiting for Afzal Khan, perhaps he's in some meeting, he can't join us. With this, I thank you all. See you, inshallah, in next time. And hopefully, after the end of this covered, we can gather together personally, physically, to discuss these things and settle the modalities for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Allah Hafiz and good evening.
Allah Hafiz.